and catch up with Malcolm Davis. He's the Senior Analyst in Defence and Capability with ASPI. Joins us live from Canberra. Good to talk to you again, Malcolm. It's interesting, it always floors me, having formerly worked in foreign affairs. There are only two areas of government spending where people talk like this. You've got to spend a certain amount, a certain share of your GDP on a certain area, and that is defence and foreign aid. So let's start off with the figure of 3.5% coming from the Americans. Is that appropriate? Is that what Australia should aspire to?
Absolutely. I think that Secretary of Defence Pete Hegseth is spot on here. When you look at the government's own policy documents, including the 2024 National Defence Strategy and Integrated Investment Program and the 2023 Defence Strategic Review, the government is actually saying quite explicitly that we live in the most challenging times since the Second World War. And yet what is happening is that although the government is increasing defence spending in the long term, that increase is not happening until the late 2028, 2029 period going into the 2030s. What I think Pete Hegseth is saying and what organisations such as ASPI are saying is that there are clear risks and threats emerging in the short term within this decade that we need to be prepared for. And by essentially pushing back all the increase in defence spending into the 2030s, we're not ready for those threats in the short term. So we do need to increase. We do need to go up to 3.5 and we need to do it as soon as possible.
Well, the government points to its increased spending, but they're talking about 2.3% by into the 2030s, so it's a long way off. Look, Donald Trump, when he was first president, really put the weights on NATO countries. I thought he was very successful at that. He got a lot of criticism because people were saying he was basically undermining NATO. Well, what he was actually doing was trying to strengthen NATO by making sure the European countries contributed more to their own defence. It worked for him, but he really did get threatening in that diplomacy. Do you see the heat really accelerating on Australia now if we don't answer the US with some better forecasts about what we're planning to do?
Yeah, look, I think, once again, Pete Hegseth has done Albanese a huge favour here by giving him a heads up as to what he should expect when he sits down with Trump later this month at the G7. Trump will make it crystal clear to Albanese that Australia does need to do more on defence. It needs to spend more. It needs to burden share to a greater degree, as is Australia's other partners in the region, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines and so on. All of them are increasing their defence spending to a much higher level than what we're doing. And so I think it's quite justified for the Trump administration to challenge us and say, look, we are in threatening times. We are facing a very severe risk of major power war emerging in our region within this decade. So Australia does need to burden share and spend more on defence as a result.
Let's just have a look at what Senator James Paterson had to say about this yesterday.
When it comes to defence and national security, often they talk a good game, but they deliver very little, and Richard Marles is in that category. He talks all the time about how this is the most dangerous and uncertain strategic environment since the end of World War II, but defence spending has been flat.
Yeah, the Liberals took a policy to increase defence spending to the last election. Obviously, they're not going to have much of a say in that over the next 3 years. But this is the crucial point, Malcolm, the one you just pointed to, and that is the strategic risks. Now, Pete Hegseth in Singapore talked up the risk of conflict over Taiwan. There's always that strategic ambiguity about what America would do in those circumstances. But that is really the great fear. But there are many other threats and weak points in our region and around the globe. Just how badly exposed are we? Not about defending our country, but I suppose in terms of defending our interests, primarily our sea lanes.
Look, I think that what you could see in a Taiwan Strait scenario, which is a very real prospect in the next 5 years, is China obviously moving against Taiwan, but also undertaking actions in the South China Sea that could interfere with our sea lanes. You could see opportunistic aggression from North Korea at the same time, and you could see opportunistic aggression by Russia against NATO. So you have this potential for horizontal escalation where a conflict in one region spreads to another. That could directly affect our sea lanes communication, interfering with our trade and our supply chains. So we have to have the ability to protect those supply chains and also at the same time be more resilient and self-reliant here in Australia, because we can't assume that the Americans will be able to do everything. We have to burden share to a much greater degree.
Yeah, well said, Malcolm. Thanks so much for joining us. Malcolm Davis there from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. We need to lift our game. We also need to lift it very, very quickly because the time for defence preparedness is now.